Welcome to Cooper's History Podcast. I will be discussing the lost ancient African kingdoms and civilizations. Tonight I will be discussing the Nok Kingdom. The Nok Kingdom. The Nok were an ancient West African society in modern-day Nigeria from circa 900 BCE to 200 CE, renowned for being one of the earliest ironworking cultures in sub-Saharan Africa and for producing distinctive terracotta sculptures featuring elongated heads, triangular eyes, and elaborate hairstyles, possibly for religious or ceremonial purposes, representing an advanced society that independently developed iron technology and flourished before mysteriously disappearing. The Nok culture is a population whose material remains are named after the Ham village of Nok in southern Kaduna state of Nigeria, where their terracotta sculptures were first discovered in 1928. The Nok people and the Gajigana people may have migrated from the central Sahara along with pearl millet and pottery and diverged prior to arriving in the northern region of modern-day Nigeria. This may have led to their respective settlements in the regions of Gajigana and Nok. Nok people may have also migrated from the West African Sahel to the region of Nok. Nok culture may have emerged in 1500 BCE and continued to persist until 1 BCE. Nok people may have developed terracotta sculptures through large-scale economic production as part of a complex funerary burial culture that may have included practices such as feasting. The earliest Nok terracotta sculptures may have developed in 900 BCE. Some Nok terracotta sculptures portray figures wielding slingshot as well as bows and arrows, which may be indicative of Nok people engaging in the hunting or trapping of undomesticated animals. A Nok sculpture portrays two individuals along with their goods in a dugout canoe. Both of the anthropomorphic figures in the watercraft are paddling. The Nok terracotta depiction of a dugout canoe may indicate that Nok people used dugout canoes to transport cargo along tributaries, for example Gurara River, of the Niger River, and exchanged them in a regional trade network. The Nok terracotta depiction of a figure with a seashell on his head may indicate that the span of these riverine trade routes may have extended to the Atlantic coast. In the maritime history of Africa, there is the earlier Dafuna canoe, which was constructed approximately 8,000 years ago in the northern region of Nigeria. As the second earliest form of water vessel known in sub-Saharan Africa, the Nok terracotta depiction of a dugout canoe was created in the central region of Nigeria during the first millennium BCE. As part of Nok traditional medicine, Nok ceramics may have been used to process roots and bark as medicinal plants for the production of medicinal decoctions. Excluding ancient Egyptian figurative art, Nok sculptures are regarded to be the earliest examples of large, three-dimensional, sculptural, figurative art in continental Africa. In 1943, British archaeologist Bernard Fagg received a visitor in the central Nigerian town of Jos, where he had spent the previous few years gathering and classifying ancient artifacts found on a rugged plateau. The visitor carried a terracotta head that, he said, had been perched atop a scarecrow in a nearby yam field. Fagg was intrigued. The piece resembled a terracotta monkey head he had seen a few years earlier, and neither piece matched the artifacts of any known ancient African civilization. Fagg, a man of boundless curiosity and energy, traveled across central Nigeria, looking for similar artifacts. As he recounted later, Bagg discovered local people had been finding terracottas in odd places for years, buried under a hockey field, perched on a rocky hilltop, protruding from piles of gravel released by power hoses in tin mining. He set up shop in a whitewashed cottage that still stands outside the village of Nok and soon gathered nearly 200 terracottas through purchase, persuasion, and his own excavations. Soil analysis from the spots where the artifacts were found dated them to around 500 BC. This seemed impossible, since the type of complex societies that would have produced such works were not supposed to have existed in West Africa that early. But when Fagg subjected plant matter found embedded in the terracotta to the then new technique of radiocarbon dating, the dates range from 440 BC to AD 200. He later dated the scarecrow head, now called the Jama head after the village where it was found, to about 500 BC using a process called thermoluminescence, which gauges the time since baked clay was fired. Through a combination of luck, legwork, and new dating techniques, Bagg and his collaborators had apparently discovered a hitherto unknown civilization which he named Nok. One excavation site, near the village of Taruga, revealed something else Bagg had not expected: iron furnaces. He found 13 such furnaces, and terracotta figurines were in such close association, inside the furnaces and around them, that he postulated the terracottas were objects of worship to aid blacksmithing and smelting. Carbon dating of charcoal inside the furnaces revealed dates as far back as 280 BC, giving Nok the earliest dates for iron smelting in sub-Saharan Africa up to that time. Thus, in short order, Fagg had discovered some of the key markers of an advanced civilization: refined art and organized worship, metal smelting, and sufficient population to support these activities. But he knew such a society did not appear in isolation. Fagg, now back at Oxford University in England, wrote that Nok culture had almost worship to aid blacksmithing and smelting. Carbon dating of charcoal inside the furnaces revealed dates as far back as 280 BC, giving Nok the earliest dates for iron smelting in sub-Saharan Africa up to that time. Thus, in short order, Fagg had discovered some of the key markers of an advanced civilization: refined art and organized worship, metal smelting, and sufficient population to support these activities. But he knew such a society did not appear in isolation. Fagg, now back at Oxford University in England, wrote that Nok culture had almost certainly begun earlier and survived longer than he had evidence for at the time. It was the product of a mature tradition, he wrote, with the probability of a long antecedent history, of which as yet no trace has been found. After 40 years of doing little archaeological exploration in the area, scholars are now returning to the scrubby, hilly land where Fagg worked and are finding that, indeed, the Nok thrived for longer than he had realized. They may have been the first complex civilization in West Africa, existing from at least 900 BC to about AD 200. Their terracottas are now some of the most iconic ancient objects from Africa, and they may be the first society in Africa south of the Sahara to smelt iron, although at least half a dozen competitors for that title have surfaced since Fagg first excavated a Nok furnace. Nigeria has a reputation for chaos, corruption, and expensive visas that has kept archaeologists away and drastically slowed the pace of research. In 1959, anthropologist George Murdoch quipped that for every ton of earth moved by archaeologists on the Nile, a teaspoon is moved on the Niger. Scholarship has also been hampered by an almost 40-year campaign of looting at Nok sites fed by the growing appetite for African antiquities among collectors in the United States and Europe. No one continued with the work of Bernard Fagg. Instead of scientific exploration, the Nok became a victim of illegal digging and international art dealers, says Peter Brunig of the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany. Looting tapered off after about 2005 because of tighter export restrictions and a glut of fakes that frightened off collectors. Now, interest in Iron Age societies in Africa is surging as archaeologists contemplate a wide-open field that could hold essential insights into how technologies, especially iron, spread across continents. Bruning and his colleague Nicole Rupp are leading a team of German and Nigerian researchers, students, and even former looters excavating sites over some 150 square miles in central Nigeria, about 2 hours' drive north of the capital, Abuja. Their study area is but a microcosm of the Nok world, which covered more than 30,000 square miles, an area the size of Portugal. On a black granite mountain towering over the savannah, Rupp and her team are digging neat trenches at the summit. Within minutes, they start to find pottery sherds, grinding stones, and fragments of red terracotta sculpture of the first type found by Fagg. Within an hour, the excavators have filled 3 big Ziploc bags with artifacts. Among them is a terracotta arm broken off of a larger statue. Its coarse, grainy surface and realistic modeling immediately identify it as distinctively Nok. In his classic survey of African art, Frank Willett wrote that the Nok created Africa's earliest sculptural tradition outside of Egypt. Like their contemporaries, the soldier builders of Xi'an, China, the Nok mastered the almost limitless sculptural possibilities of terracotta. With it, they created figures depicting illness, warfare, love, and music. For example, Rupp and Brunig's team has found a sculpture of a man and woman kneeling in front of each other, their arms wrapped around each other in a loving embrace, and also several bare-buttocked prisoners with ropes around their necks and waists. Another figure, which has a skull for a head and wears an amulet around his neck, is shaking 2 instruments resembling maracas. There is also a figure of a man with a wispy mustache, mouth open, as if in speech or song, and one of a man playing a drum resting between his legs, possibly the earliest depiction of musical. Rupp agrees. When you look at a piece like this, she says, referring to the just-discovered arm, you can see that the Nok were experts at making terracotta. There was a specialized, creative class. There may have been a kind of terracotta guild, which, if true, would suggest the Nok had well-developed class hierarchy, she adds. Brunig and Rupp have found about 20 iron implements, including fearsome spear points, bracelets, and small knives, most of which are fairly crude-looking. How and when Africans developed iron is important, because metallurgy is considered a crucial marker in the shift to complex societies. Manufacturing metal means better tools for farming, hunting, and preparing food, as well as better weapons for waging war and gaining resources. Yet whether metalworking creates the condition for civilization to flourish, or vice versa, remains an open question for archaeologists. Carbon dating on charcoal that Brunig gathered from a Nok iron smelter at a site called Intini yielded a date of between 519 and 410 BC, suggesting that iron technology was established earlier than previous scholars, including Fagg, had realized. These may not be the oldest smelters in sub-Saharan Africa, however. French archaeologists have located evidence of iron smelting in the Termit Hills of Niger from as early as 1400 BC, but critics point out that the wood used for dating could have been centuries old, a problem that dogs carbon dating, especially in very arid places such as Niger, where the wood desiccates and lasts longer. Groening acknowledges that the problem could distort dates for the Intini furnace as well, but he has an important piece of evidence, Nok pottery, found inside the furnace alongside the charcoal, suggesting that they were placed there around the same time. As a result of his research, Groening has been able to isolate a moment in time when iron and stone implements coexisted. Excavators regularly find iron tools only a short distance from Nok stone axes, suggesting they were used in the same communities, maybe even the same household. When iron first develops, it might be too rare or too costly to be wasted on axes or other things that you can make with stone, he says. Our hypothesis is that iron tools replaced stone only after the technology was developed enough to deliver sufficient quantities of iron. The Nok is an almost perfect culture on which to test this assumption. Groening's evidence has also reinforced a view held by most archaeologists that ancient West Africans moved from stone tools directly to iron without an intervening copper age. That's a leap that few other parts of the world appear to have made. With the exception of a site in Mauritania known as Grotte aux Chauves-souris, where, starting in 1968, French archaeologists found copper tools and furnaces dating from 800 to 200 BC, and another in Niger called Cuivre-la-Toux, excavated by French archaeologists in the 1980s and dating from slightly earlier, researchers have yet to find evidence of copper smelting before iron smelting anywhere in West Africa. Its transition from Stone Age to Iron Age has puzzled researchers since Western European and North African cultures moved into iron after first smelting copper for a millennium or so, while others, such as those in Peru, made copper for centuries without ever developing iron. In the sense of a progression of technological periods, with few exceptions, there was not a copper age between the Stone and Iron Ages in West Africa, says Tom Fenn, an expert on African metallurgy at the University of Arizona. Iron technology was probably brought across the Sahara by travelers from North Africa, says Rod McIntosh, an African specialist at Yale University. But archaeologists are looking at the possibility that West Africans developed iron-working technology autonomously, possibly starting with the Nok. Iron technology, and whether it was imported from across the Sahara or developed in West Africa, is currently a red-hot topic in the scholarly community. Skeptics of autonomous development are accused of denigrating the achievements of African technology, whereas believers are accused of lacking hard evidence. It has become a political debate, says Groening. He will not commit to one side of the argument over the other before he excavates more Nok smelters, which he plans to do with a French archaeometallurgist next year. One skeptic is Rudiger Krauss, a European Iron Age expert at Goethe University. When people see that somebody else has better technology, it moves very fast. And iron knives are much better than stone. You can sharpen them, he says. Mobility was very high in the ancient world. From the north coast of Africa to Nigeria is not a great distance for the movement of a new technology. Performance in sub-Saharan Africa. At one site, Brunig and Rupp found 1,700 pieces of terracotta in barely 450 square yards, indicating a large population. Despite the thematic variety, Nok terracotta has some characteristics that persist over hundreds of square miles and centuries of production. Figures almost always show large-headed people with almond-shaped eyes and parted lips. They often have grand headdresses or hairdos, which may indicate high status. A common pose, and one much imitated by forgers, shows a man sitting with his arms resting on his knees, gazing outward. Microscopic inspection of the clay used in the terracotta shows it to be remarkably uniform over the whole Nok area, suggesting that the clay came from a single yet undiscovered source. It could, says Brunig, support the idea of a unified Nok state or central authority of some kind. The homogeneity of the clay used for terracotta might indicate centralized production, but other interpretations, including the concentration of skilled specialists, are no less probable at the moment, says Brunig. I think there was a set of respected central rules that were enforced either through authorities or through common beliefs, or both. Little is understood about how Nok society ended. Sometime after AD 200, the once thriving Nok population declined, as attested to by a sharp drop in the volume of pottery and terracotta in soil layers corresponding to those years. Overexploitation of natural resources and a heavy reliance on charcoal may have played a role, says Brunig. Even more puzzling is Nok's legacy to later cultures. Art historians have long seen Nok as an isolated phenomenon, a splendid relic cut off from the sequence of African art over the next 2 millennia. Later civilizations in southern Nigeria had advanced metalworking skills and a tradition of naturalistic portraiture, and art historians are looking more closely at what they might owe to Nok. The most celebrated of these later cultures was Ife, whose people in southwestern Nigeria turned bronze into stunning portrait heads around AD 1300. We would need more research to establish a stylistic continuum between Nok and Ife, said Musa Hambolu, research director at Nigeria's National Commission for Museums and Monuments in Abuja. To do this would require more detailed study of Nok sculptures because, for now, the evidence is very fragmentary. Bernard Fagg wrestled with this question. Where did Nok culture come from and where did it go? He wrote about the striking similarities of style and subject matter between Nok and Ife, but acknowledged there was no proof the people of Ife had ever seen Nok terracotta. Now Brunig is trying to solve that riddle. In the space of 1,000 years, West Africa moved from sedentary farming complexes like Nok to great empires such as Ife and Benin, he says. No society is completely isolated in time. That's a story we're starting to tell. Key aspects of the Nok culture. Location and discovery. Named after the village of Nok in Nigeria, where their artifacts were first unearthed by tin miners in the 1920s and 1930s. Iron Age pioneers developed iron smelting independently, skipping the Bronze Age, making tools like spear points and bracelets from around 750 to 550 BCE. Terracotta art created large, detailed clay figures, often depicting humans with distinctive features, almond eyes, elaborate hair, and sometimes fantastical creatures, suggesting complex spiritual or social roles. Society and lifestyle were farmers cultivating grains with advanced practices, likely had a sophisticated judicial system and used iron tools alongside stone ones, notes National Geographic Society and EBSCO. Legacy. Their artistic style influenced later West African cultures, and their sophisticated technology marks them as one of Africa's earliest complex civilizations, highlighting a rich, often overlooked history according to Inside Africa and Historical Nigeria. Thank you for joining me this evening. Make sure to join me next week when I will be discussing the Ethiopian Empire.